In regards to fruit, berries are the best for a low carb approach. Berries are always going to be lower in glucose or fructose. So I preference those over anything else. If we look at other fruits, some are incredibly high in glucose and sugars. Always, if you are eating fruit, eat your fruit, and don't blend it, and don't. So if you are, and I'm not saying to eat oranges by any means, because they're incredibly high in sugar. But if we blend these and turn these into a smoothie, sometimes doing so is going to remove some of the compounds in there that are going to negate some of so the fibrous content in there is going to cause more problems if we remove that than eating something as nature intended. So fruit is the part of the plant that wants to be eaten. But we need to think from an evolutionary perspective. So in the UK, for example, we wouldn't have had an awful lot of fruits available to us. Berries would have been the main source of fruit for us. And berries 10, 20, 30,000 years ago looked very different to how they do today. Berries these days have been hybridized and crossbred to produce a bigger yield. Many of the foods that we see on the market now have gone down this format. So they look very different to how they did, many, many years ago. In the UK, we wouldn't have been eating bananas, for example. The apples that we would have been consuming would have been small apples, these tiny little things, not these big, massive, oversized apples that we see. So try to eat an evolutionary appropriate diet in that respect. But from a glucose perspective, berries are the best. There are lots of reasons to remove fruits. I don't want to get too deep in regards to the phytoalexins found in fruits, because I believe that they are a good segue for many people who are gravitating into the lifestyle. But always eat them in moderation. So never overconsume, even the berries, for example, because there's still sugar. Yes, they come from nature, but fructose affects something called the polyol pathway. And if we are insulin resistant, it increases this polyol pathway by 10 times. The polyol pathway basically increases the amount of the production of fructose within the body, and it can lead to things like fatty liver disease. It can lead to the body's inability to process the fructose, which can lead to increase in triglycerides. It can lead to IBS issues. In fact, IBS is fructose malabsorption. So if any of your listeners are suffering with IBS, nobody's probably ever told you this before, but this is to do with fructose malabsorption. So it can be from consuming too much fruit, as in fructose, vegetables also, because vegetables do contain fructose, and grains. Grains contain a compound called fructans, which break down into fructose. Now, the interesting thing with the grains is grains are treated with a herbicide called glyphosate. Now, glyphosate blocks a pathway in the body called the shikimate pathway. The shikimate pathway is how we create 95% of our neurotransmitters. So just by consuming that compound, you prevent your body from creating 95% of its neurotransmitters efficiently. This will lead to being depressed and feeling anxious and so on and so forth. All of these things come back to diet. Everything comes back to diet. Now, the input to that shikimate pathway is something called phosphoryl pyruvate. Phosphoryl pyruvate is the output of fructose absorption. So if we block PEP, we block the body's ability to process fructose. So fructose builds up in the lower gut. It begins to ferment, and this is what causes IBS. So if you are a sufferer of IBS, then grains have to be removed. You need to take the grains out and any other compound that contains grains. And this is things like biscuits and cakes and crisps and so on and so forth. Almost every item in the supermarket contains these compounds. But IBS is such a simple thing to rectify when you understand that it comes from these grains and the glyphosate. But circling back, berries are the best option in regards to the fruit. That's my short version.